Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, December 17th, 2024, and today I've got a special treat for you. My dear friend, Mimi Casteel, winemaker at Hopewell Wine in Oregon and co-host of the No-Till Market Garden podcast, is going to join me today to talk about the wine industry, an enormous and currently evolving ag sector here in the U.S., we're going to talk about some of the cool ecological changes that are happening within viticulture. We discuss the future of that industry in the face of a big wave of teetotalers. And we also get a question about if you could do it all over again, would you still farm? So let's do it. Mimi Casteel, thank you so much for joining the show. I always enjoy our chats.
As do I, Jesse. It's been a long time since we were face to face across
the planet. Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to talk with you about is catch us up on the wine/viticulture industry, and maybe tell me what are some of the things that are going on that are like in the ecological realm that are, I don't know, kind of cool right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when you sent me the question, and I realized there's actually quite a bit of cool things going on. I mean, on the one hand, people are feeling a little apocalyptic about the slowing down of the wine market. But on the other side, I would say more interest than ever in sort of the ecological side of bringing our systems up to date, if you will. So some of the cooler things that I've been paying attention to are a lot of projects around agroforestry and incorporating trees, especially in places where the UV day has become pretty significant. And also some regenerative hydrology design, building that into a kind of a systems design for new plantings or replantings, some newer research into finding rootstocks that are going to be more appropriate for an unknowable future. So some more, I guess, versatile and hardy rootstock choices kind of coming down the pipeline. And I mean, just a lot more interest in no-till systems and looking at keeping soil covered. At least that's been coming on for about the last decade. But those are the most innovative things I see outside in our viticultural systems. But then the other side of it, which is ecological, but maybe not as farmy, but still fascinating because we all think about it, is packaging. And I like to talk about this because I think that if the wine industry were really to face its most significant demon, it's our packaging and what that sort of encompasses in terms of how we move our stuff around the globe. And one of the more exciting things that I've been doing recently is moving my production into a reusable bottle, which is fairly commonly done in Europe, but it's harder to accomplish in the United States. And so there's an operation called Revino in Oregon who have developed a mold, a reusable mold that can be identified in both recycling systems and also in our bottling line so that it can be sorted and selected for rewash and reuse, which I'm very excited about that because I think it's time that, you know, not just for wine, but for everything that we consume, we start to acknowledge that single use really has no future, and even recycling has a lot of problems that we probably need to sort out before we feel too good about our recycling bins.
And then we like to ignore a little bit. Yeah. Elaborate a little bit on what makes a bottle recyclable or reusable versus not reusable. What about a wine bottle isn't currently reusable and versus like what you're moving it into?
It's such a good question. And the fact of the matter is nothing is really in the way of any wine bottle being reusable. The challenge is that our automated bottling lines and other systems are usually only calibrated to deal within millimeters or even less distances in terms of where the label goes, how the cork goes in, all of those things. So you need to have a standard bottle for one run of bottling. And to address that, Ravino has designed a Burgundy bottle, a Bordeaux bottle that can be identified by a demarcation on the bottle itself so that it can be pulled out of, say it goes into the recycling bin by accident. It can be pulled out of that system easily just by the sort of ocular identification mark. And then on our bottling lines, that can also orient it for, rewash and reuse. Other than that, in Europe, the entire sort of system around glass has been set up for glass reuse and recycling, and it's generally speaking much smaller production. So they're using fewer, big mobile bottling lines and things like that. In the US, the bigger companies, they need things to be more standardized and more of the almost exact same size. So that's the main limitation here. But otherwise, for my production, especially, if we got all our glass back, it wouldn't matter what size it was. If you're hand bottling things and things like that, it really doesn't make that big of a difference.
Right. Also, would you elaborate a little bit on the hydrological changes, like that sort of design element?
Yeah,
I'm definitely curious
I
about that.
think it's really fascinating because I remember, I'm sure you remember when you first started going to like ecological farming conferences and the water for every farm, the key lining concepts and everything. These are concepts that have been around for a really, really long time, and the sort of water harvesting techniques of indigenous people all around the world. And interestingly, I think for viticulture, there's a bit of a catch-22 because vines, at least the ones that we put on American rootstocks now, they don't like to have their feet wet. So for the last probably 50 to 70 years, the rootstocks that have been chosen have been selected for not being tolerant of having their feet wet. And that goes along with a methodology of development where artificial drainage is sort of part of what people do as standard operating procedure. If you have a low drainage area, you would put in subsoil drain tiles. And you can imagine that across many, many, many millions of acres and over long periods of time, we've been part of a larger agricultural movement of draining wetlands and areas that would have held water longer historically. So, and this is slow moving, and I would say that this is definitely more of the cutting edge and some conversations that I've been having, at a very high level. But in terms of planting vineyards for the future, which everybody who's part of a company that, let's say, is more than 100 years old, so a lot of the historic houses in Europe are thinking about what is the next 100 years going to look like? And do we need to address some of these institutional issues that we have? And drainage is one of those things. So if you're looking at setting something up for a regenerative hydrology, especially in a place that's been artificially drained, you'd be looking at maybe using some of those key lines and putting in some trench lines just to hold water back a little bit, and obviously keeping the soil covered in a way that those vineyards haven't historically done, and putting in some ecological features, including trees and other things that can help hold water and store water longer. So depending on what the topography looks like, managing swales so that they are able to hold water and not artificially drained. And just on 100-acre system, it can be truly millions of gallons of water saved every year that would otherwise have been basically just flushing into whatever tributary or river system that they've been putting their drain tiles into. So it's an exciting and hopefully growing idea that is catching on in viticulture, especially because we have definitely seen some of our droughtiest years in the Western United States and some places in Europe as well.
Wow, that's very cool. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get a question from one of our Patreon members. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op in Cleveland, Ohio, making NOP-compliant living soils for organic growers. Everything from Tilth is compost-based, and they divert around 4,000 tons of food scraps from landfills each year. I have used Tilth Soil for several years now for my plant starts. I love the results. I get consistent germination and consistent growth, plus excellent customer support. It's a lovably nerdy cast of folks who run Tilth. So start your season with excellent germination and strong transplants. Check out Tilth's pre-sale pricing for the 2025 season at tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com, and click Farmers. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and would like to support it, you can at patreon.com/no-till-growers. We try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but we will always get to those Patreon questions. Today's Patreon question comes from Western Missouri No-Till Gardening, who asks, quote, "I would be interested to hear if you had to do it all over again, would you still farm? If you would still farm, what would you change about how you did it, whether that be buy versus lease, farm cooperatively or independently, tools you wish you had or hadn't bought, varieties you wish you had or hadn't grown, farm layout, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." All right, there's a lot there, but I think the big question there, Mimi, is if you could do it all over again, would you still farm?
It's such a farmer to farmer question, isn't it? I mean, it really kind of gets at the existential issue that we all face. I think we ask a lot of our families and friends when we go on this journey, and without any hesitation, yes, 100%. I would always do it again, and I think I can say confidently that you would too, since you keep doing it. But I would say that there's a part of me that fantasizes all the time about it, when I come back as another version of a person who might farm. I really have been so inspired by some of the cooperative farms that have been interviewed on the Collab podcast, but also just that I've come across in doing interviews and just meeting people in our adventures that we go on. And I think I'm super in love with the idea of doing it more cooperatively if I ever had the opportunity to do it again. And there are projects that I'm involved in that are getting closer to that. But I think the things that get in the way of us feeling like we can keep going are really more about isolation than about being able to do it. And also how much we carry financially and just sort of risk-wise for our entire families and what that means for just your stress levels and all of that. So I think that the version that I would imagine doing if I had all the hindsight would be kind of like a food village where there was some real, intentional work on how does this organism want to grow and who's really good at what and what are the tools that we need and what does the design look like so that it's pretty self-sustaining and where you're not tripping over one thing to do another. And you can make those tweaks to your own system as you go. But I think when you have a support system that is also invested in the same sort of long-term building of a food system that supports the people who live there, that's where I hope we can all be moving, and that these ways of sharing not just the day-to-day responsibilities, but what it really means to sort of ecologically steward a landscape over time, that responsibility should be borne by a community and not just by a few people who happen to own land. But I really want to know what your answer to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy part of that is, of course I would still farm if I could do it all over again. Like, I've loved the journey of farming. I think curious people always, I don't know if I've said this before on the podcast anywhere, but curious people kind of always end up in the soil, right? Like everything starts at the soil. Eventually you're going to end up there. And I feel like there's no world in which I wouldn't have become a farmer, even if I tried to do something else for a little while. And I think that there's aspects of it though, kind of like what you touched on with cooperative farming. If I could go back in time, and I know Hannah feels this way too, trying to be more open to the idea of starting something collaborative, more like you would start any other business. Just like, hey, let's get some capital together. Let's start this. Let's like really plan it out like a business, and not just like, I want to grow food for people and for myself. Let's see how this goes. Cause that was kind of our approach. And that's like top 10 worst business plans of all time. But we learned a lot, and obviously like, I think it put me in a place to maybe be a slightly better educator for that reason. But yeah, I think I would have pursued those more, those sort of collaborative options. I think another thing that I wish that I'd done a little bit differently is just work on more farms and more types of farms. I did 2 years apprenticing, and then Hannah and I were like, let's start a farm. And I think, and she would agree with this too, probably, that we should have taken like 1 or 2 more seasons, or even 2 more full years, and just gone to work on a different kind of farm, because the farm we learned on was so heavily like dry farmed, and they did a lot of things like in more extensive farming, much more like row cropping, that sort of stuff, where I didn't know anything about irrigation when I got into farming. I didn't know anything about like intensive growing in beds, really. Like I didn't know a lot of the stuff that I use now. I kind of had to learn from books and on the fly. So that's one thing I think I probably would have changed. I mean, and then that question had a lot of details about like farm layout and all that stuff. And that's probably more that we can get into, but there's a lot of little things that I would change. But I think it's those bigger picture changes that I think about, like how I would have done things differently, getting back into it.
I completely agree. In fact, I was just talking about this with a farmer that I work with, and I wish there were a more robust sort of opportunity for farmers to do sabbaticals on each other's farms, where you could, because I too wish that when I was younger, I had worked in a lot more different types of systems. A lot of the greatest ideas that I get are from my background in forestry. And I think, well, what if I had more extensive background in any other cropping system, as opposed to just, these two worlds that I've been trying to mash together. And I think that would be so valuable if there were I know farm swap exists, but just a sabbatical system for farmers who want to go and experience something that they're not familiar with, and really learn from somebody who's willing to teach. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah. And I think that's the kind of thing that also we could use some government support for, because it's just like it's kind of like what you were talking about with the family stuff. Like there's no world in which I can just be like, all right, I need to go take 3 or 4 months and just go farm with this other person.
You guys are cool.
Yeah.
Right?
You guys got this. Good. Great. There's no world in which I could do that. And there's also like, this is completely off topic, but just like there's no support for getting started in farming. There's no, there's no sort of pathway to it that makes sense, that really teaches you about the business side and all that stuff. You kind of have to just pick all this stuff up yourself. But for such an important, career, not just in terms of like your community, but just in general, environmentally, all these things, like I do wish there was more concentrated support for sort of small scale ecological farming to be able to do things like that and learn the right way. And then also maybe, it's things like this. I love the sabbatical idea. Yeah. Well, we'll keep working on that. Maybe in the future. All right.
Something else we can start.
Something else. We have time for that, right? We're farmers. Yeah. We got all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. We'll take one more quick break. And then when we come back, we will talk about the future. Be right back. All right. So, small question for you, Mimi. How do you feel about the future of the wine industry? Where is it headed? What does that look like?
Small
Oh, I
question.
know. Just a
Yeah.
little one.
So, I mean, I'm I'm a serial optimist, so I feel curious about where it's all going. I think it's an interesting moment right now because if you were part of the chatter of the wine world right now, there's this big concern that people are drinking less, and I actually feel really good about that. I think that as an industry that has some role to play in how we make drinking or any kind of substance use appear, that we should be sensitive when people want to make positive changes in their lives. And so I fully support and am not afraid of a less alcohol movement. I think if we want to live well with all of the beautiful things that we make, we need to understand that people have to take those journeys themselves. And so right now, even if people are drinking less, I think that that provides a wonderful opportunity for those choices to be more intentional and more about getting really, really excited about what a wine means and can be, and less about how much cheap wine can I buy to have something to drink all the time, or whatever it is. But I think that it's an opportunity for all of us to look at whatever you're doing, whether it's growing the most beautiful broccoli or the most incredible wine that you think you're capable of. It's a it's a magnificent thing that we get to participate in, where we use the natural world to manifest something that is holding the tension between tradition and creativity, and that the idea that maybe once or five times in your life you will have achieved something truly remarkable, and that pursuit is really what drives the whole game, right? So I think that right now there's too much wine in the world, and it's using land in an irresponsible way. And we're taking some hard looks at ourselves right now, which is a good thing, and it's the right time to be doing that. And I do worry about some of the pretty hefty tariffs that might come down, and how that affected my European colleagues years ago when the American tariffs were really, really intense. But it will also offer people a chance to look at American wines a little more closely. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of really freaky deaky things going on everywhere for the indefinite future. And as long as you really love what you do, I just feel optimistic about where it can take you. So that's my answer.
I think that's great. And I know that one of my favorite things in the world is wine, and simultaneously like have had to stop drinking this year, which has been a wild experience just in terms of how I feel about like everything you said about wine. I'm like, I totally agree with all of that. And simultaneously I can no longer enjoy it. And so like, but I do love the sort of optimistic view of it. I like talking about the creative side of it. I like talking about like the artistic side of it. I think all of that stuff is very true. And I also like that you use the word opportunity in there, and maybe you want to expand on that a little bit, but I think that there are still opportunities within viticulture, within, perennial production like that, within creating really special things for people, experiences. I still think that opportunity is robust. And yeah, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think that this is the era of reckoning with meaningful experience, because you feel a sort of the gravity of where we are right now, sort of tipping over this, how much we can really use social media to reflect anything that we're actually doing, and how one day with somebody coming to your farm and spending a day with you and seeing the work that you're doing is so much more gratifying. Even though it's work, it's so much more gratifying to spend that time with that one human being in real life than it is to have a bazillion likes on your whatever post that you did that you basically just squeezed in there because it's the 4,000th thing you've done that day. So not to downplay social media, but I think what wine has always done that I think other farming systems are going to start embracing, not just start embracing, they already are embracing, but I think we're moving in that direction. I think it's a very positive direction, is that we need people to be on farms. We need people to understand what it takes to bring the bounty to them and where it actually might come from. And wine is one lens through which we can look at the regions that we're from and taste what it tastes like. But I think it's coming to everything, and it really it's a little bit late for it to have come to, any other crop. But I think every crop deserves its moment of being a terroir beauty, and that we would appreciate life more if everyone got more time on a farm. I mean, I have had the really awesome experience this season of interviewing a few different farm organizations where they have a not-for-profit side and they have a for-profit side, and they have all these stacked enterprises. And it's really fascinating to think about what that might look like in any place, but just how it helps build a really strong community that's different than how your farmer's market community kind of comes to the farmer's market. It's more this anchoring set of farms that are the heart of a region. And I think we can move in that direction. I think that it's a really exciting thing, and I want it for wine. I want it for everything.
I agree. I love that. And also, I should say that I've loved your interviews this year. I loved the biochar interview that went up today, as we record this, was awesome. I thought that she was amazing. She presented a lot of great information, but I also didn't know you'd done so many biochar trials. So to whoever's listening right now, you should go back if you've missed that episode and listen, because that is very cool and very interesting stuff. So thank you for all that you do, Mimi. I love chatting with you. I would do this every day if we could. And I'm wishing you the best this winter season.
Thanks, Jesse. And thanks everyone for supporting the podcast. I can't tell you how many, it's so funny, the reasons people stop you or talk to you or whatever, but so many people talk about this podcast and how much it's meant to them to spend time with you since the beginning, whatever, 2016, and just feeling like they're on a journey with somebody who really gets what it means to do this, and that you've added this whole other thing to your life, yours, Jackson's, Michael's, Dan's, everybody who's part of the podcast, just what it means to have been putting all this out into the world all this time. It's really a big deal, and I appreciate you so much and everything that you're doing. So I'm a big fan too. I love our little talks, as infrequent as they are, and I hope that we can find more time for these in the future.
I hope so too. I would, like I said, I would do this every day. It's the best. All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Mimi is the best. I love her dearly. I also really advise you seek out that interview Mimi did yesterday for the No-Till Market Garden podcast with Kelpie Wilson, who is the author of the new book, The Biochar Handbook. I'll link that in the show notes. Kelpie has an awesome and somewhat dynamic story about how she got into biochar. I loved it. Anyway, huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of December, you get a big shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Philippa Manning-Smith, Matthew Renner, Sean Albiston, and Jill Fetcher. I'll bet it's Fetcher. Here's the thing. This group in this novel is about a group of kayakers who are headed down the Ohio River. They graduated high school and they went off to college, and they went to different colleges, and they're back together. And so this summer they decide to kayak all down the Ohio, which is probably legal. I don't know. They take a little offshoot, and they decide to go down this little river, and they find themselves in a forgotten town called Applebeast, Kentucky. But the surprise thing about this town is that they're very technologically advanced, but they aren't aware of the outside world, and the outside world's not aware of them. So there's some language barriers, and it's pretty much the rest of the story. I mean, it goes on for a while where they're just like, "Who are you?" But they don't understand each other. It's kind of awkward, but it's a good story. All right, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.